Before I let my son's lawyer finish his sentence, I reached into my coat pocket and set a manila envelope on the table. The room went quiet, not the polite quiet of a meeting that's wrapping up. The hollow, airless quiet of a room where everyone suddenly realizes they've made a terrible miscalculation. My son was sitting across from me in his tailored suit, the one I paid for when he made partner. His wife was beside him, posture perfect, expression carved from marble. Their attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Dole, had her mouth half open. My own lawyer, a retired family law judge named Gerald Wick, who had agreed to take my case as a favor, leaned back slightly in his chair. He had seen the envelope before. He knew what was inside. Nobody else did. Before we proceed with the competency petition, I said, I'd like everyone in this room to take a look at what's in that envelope. My son's jaw tightened. Dad, this isn't necessary. Let me be the judge of that. And that's how 38 years of being a good father came down to a single manila envelope on a conference room table in Tucson, Arizona, on a Tuesday afternoon in March. My name is Raymond Hollis. I'm 63 years old. I spent 26 years building a regional supply chain company from a 2-truck operation out of my garage into something with 47 employees and contracts across 4 states. I retired at 61, sold 60% of the business to a private equity group, and handed operational control to my son, who had been working there since he graduated from business school. I kept 40%. I kept a seat on the board. I kept the house in the Rincon Mountains that I had lived in for 31 years. I kept my life, or so I thought. 11 months before that conference room meeting, I had a minor health episode. Nothing catastrophic. A bout of confusion after a medication interaction that my doctor sorted out in 2 days and cleared completely within a week. I was fine. The tests showed I was fine. My doctor put it in writing that I was fine. But my son had been in the hospital waiting room when it happened, and something in his eyes changed after that. I noticed it then, but didn't understand it. I understand it now. He started calling more, visiting more, which sounds like the behavior of a concerned son, and maybe that's what I told myself at the time. He started asking questions about my financial arrangements, about the trust documents, about whether I had thought about updating my estate plan. I told him I had a lawyer for that. He suggested I use his lawyer. I said I was happy with my own. He said Patricia Dole was very good, very experienced, very thorough. I said I was sure she was. Then came the dinner. My son and his wife had me over in December, 6 months after the hospital incident. Their house is beautiful. My daughter-in-law has excellent taste and no compunction about spending money to indulge it. We had a nice meal. My granddaughter, who was 9 at the time, showed me a drawing she had made at school. I complimented it and meant it. After she went to bed, the conversation shifted. They thought I should consider a conservatorship arrangement. Voluntary, they emphasized. Just a framework. A safety net. Given my recent health scare and the complexity of my financial situation, my son would be named conservator. He would manage my assets, my medical decisions, my day-to-day financial affairs. I was 62 years old with a clean bill of health, a fully functional mind, and an investment portfolio managed by professionals I had known for decades. I looked at my son across his expensive dining room table and asked him if he was serious. He said he was. He said it was for my own protection. I told him I would think about it. I didn't think about it. What I did instead was call Gerald Wick the next morning and ask him what a conservatorship petition would look like if someone filed one against me without my cooperation. Gerald told me. Then he asked me if I expected that to happen. I told him I didn't know yet. Then I started paying attention. My son had been given operational authority over the company on the understanding that the board, which included 2 outside directors and my 40% stake, would maintain oversight. I started reviewing the quarterly reports more carefully. I started asking questions at board meetings that I had previously let slide. I hired a forensic accountant named Dale Pruitt, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for finding things people didn't want found. I told him to look at everything from the past 18 months. Dale called me 6 weeks later. He asked if I could come to his office. I said I could. I will never forget sitting in that chair across from Dale's desk while he walked me through what he had found. The numbers were laid out on a series of spreadsheets, printed in a font so small I had to lean in. Dale had a highlighter in his hand and used it with the calm precision of a man explaining something unpleasant but factual, the way a doctor explains a diagnosis. There were vendor contracts that had been amended without board approval. Fees being paid to a consulting entity that Dale had traced back to a shell company registered in Nevada. The shell company's registered agent was a name I didn't recognize, but the address on file was my daughter-in-law's former employer, where she had worked for 3 years before my son's company began paying that entity nearly $400,000 across 14 months. I sat with that number for a moment. "Are you certain?" I asked. "The paper trail is very clean," Dale said, "which actually makes it easier to follow, not harder." I asked him if there was more. There was more. My son had been in preliminary discussions with the private equity group about buying out my remaining 40% at a valuation Dale described as aggressively below market. The discussions had been happening for 4 months. I had not been informed. The other board members had not been informed. If the valuation had gone through, I would have received roughly 60 cents on the dollar for a stake worth considerably more. "Why would they offer below market?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Dale folded his hands on the desk. "Because they may have been told that the current minority shareholder was experiencing cognitive decline and might be open to a discounted buyout if approached through the right channel. The right channel being my son. I drove home from Dale's office and sat in my living room for 3 hours. Outside the window, the mountains were the same mountains they had always been, the same burnt orange and purple at dusk that had made me fall in love with this piece of land when I was 32 years old and had no money and a head full of plans. I had built something here. Not just the business, a life, a family. I had coached my son's little league team. I had stayed up with him when he had nightmares. I had paid for his education, his wedding, his first car, the down payment on his house. I had given him a job and then an empire and then trusted him with both. And he had looked at me lying in a hospital bed and seen an opportunity. I called Gerald Wick that evening and told him what Dale had found. Gerald listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Have you spoken to your son?" he asked. "Not yet. Before you do, I want you to understand what you're likely dealing with. If he's already in contact with Patricia Dole about a competency petition, this isn't spontaneous. This has been building for months. The financial activity Dale found may be related. If he can establish conservatorship, he gains legal control over your assets, including your board seat and your ability to challenge any of those transactions." I understood what he was telling me. "So the petition isn't about protecting me." "Based on what you've described," Gerald said carefully, "it doesn't appear to be." I asked him what I should do. He told me to do nothing visible, keep attending board meetings, keep taking my calls, keep behaving exactly as I had been behaving, let them file if they were going to file, and keep documenting everything. That's what I did for the next 5 months. Dale continued his work. Gerald prepared a response to a petition that hadn't been filed yet, but that both of us believed was coming. I went to my granddaughter's school play in February and sat beside my son in the auditorium and watched her perform and clapped at the right moments and said all the right things afterward at the ice cream place they liked. My son seemed relieved by how normal I was acting. I imagine he mistook it for obliviousness. The petition came in March. Patricia Dole filed it on a Tuesday. My son called me an hour later to tell me personally, his voice careful and practiced, the way you speak to someone you've decided is fragile. "This isn't an attack, Dad. We're just trying to make sure you're protected." "I understand," I said. "The hearing is in 3 weeks. We'll have a doctor testify about your episode last year. It's really just a formality." "I appreciate you explaining that," I said. "I love you, Dad. I know you do," I said, and hung up the phone. Gerald had suggested that we wait for the formal hearing before presenting our evidence. He wanted everything in front of a judge. But Patricia Dole's office called 2 days later to propose a preliminary meeting with all parties present to discuss a voluntary resolution. My son's lawyer wanted to settle this quietly before it reached the courtroom. She probably sensed something wasn't right. Gerald advised me to agree to the meeting. So that's how we ended up in that conference room. My son and his wife on one side, their attorney at the end. Gerald beside me, and the envelope in front of everyone. Patricia Dole was the first to move. She reached for the envelope, which was within her reach, and I let her take it. She opened it. Read the first page, then the second. The color in her face changed, subtle but visible, like a cloud passing over something. She set it down without finishing it and looked at my son. He looked at it. His wife looked at him. I waited. "These are financial documents," Patricia Dole said, her voice professionally neutral. "They are," I said. "Specifically, they're the findings of a forensic audit conducted by Dale Pruitt, CPA, who has 20 years of experience as a financial examiner and has testified in 11 cases in this state. The audit covers 18 months of transactions run through the company I own 40% of. Gerald can walk you through the highlights if you'd like, but the summary is this. There appears to be approximately $400,000 in payments made to a consulting entity that traces back to a company associated with my daughter-in-law. Those payments were made without board approval. There are also records of preliminary acquisition discussions with our equity partners that were conducted without my knowledge and that appear to have involved representations about my mental fitness." My son stood up. "This is ridiculous." "Sit down," his wife said, very quietly. He sat down. Patricia Dole was reading faster now, her eyes moving across the pages with the focused speed of someone doing damage calculations. "These documents wouldn't be admissible in a competency hearing," she said. "You're right," Gerald said pleasantly. "But they'd be very admissible in a civil fraud case. And in a referral to the State Attorney General's office, which I've taken the liberty of drafting. We haven't sent that referral yet." He paused. "We could discuss whether we need to." Silence. My daughter-in-law had not moved since I put the envelope on the table. Her posture was still perfect. Her expression was still controlled, but her hands, which were folded in front of her, had gone very still in the particular way that hands go still when the person they belong to is working very hard not to show anything at all. My son looked at me. He was 51 years old. I had known him his entire life. I had been there the morning he was born, had held him while my wife recovered. I had watched him take his first steps on the kitchen floor of the house on Mesquite Lane, had driven him to school, had seen him off to college, had danced with his wife at their wedding, had been in the waiting room when my granddaughter arrived. And now I was sitting across from him in a conference room, watching him understand that the plan had failed. "Dad," he said, "I'm listening. I wasn't trying to hurt you. Tell me what you were trying to do." He looked at his lawyer. She gave him a small, careful shake of her head. "I can't discuss specifics right now." "Then let me tell you what I think happened," I said. "I think you watched me in that hospital bed last year and made a decision. I think you decided that I was getting older, that my health might decline, and that if you didn't act quickly, the assets I had built might end up distributed in ways you couldn't control. I think you and your wife made some financial arrangements that you expected to clean up once you had conservatorship, and I think you told our equity partners something about my mental state that wasn't true, to push through a buyout at a price that would have cost me nearly $2 million. My son said nothing. "What I'd like to know," I continued, "is whether my granddaughter knew any of this." "Of course not," his wife said. The first words she had spoken since the envelope was opened. "Good," I said, "because she's the only one in this situation I'm not angry at." My son put his face in his hands. Patricia Dole set down the documents. She looked at Gerald with the expression of a professional recognizing a professional. "What resolution are you proposing?" Gerald laid it out clearly. The competency petition would be withdrawn with prejudice. The consulting payments would be repaid with interest. My son would resign from operational control of the company within 60 days, retaining only a minority employment role if the new management structure allowed for it. The equity acquisition discussions would be disclosed to the board and voided, and I would retain full legal and financial autonomy, documented in an agreement that Patricia Dole's office would prepare and file. In exchange, Gerald said, the referral to the Attorney General's office would not be sent. "That's everything," my son said, looking up. His voice was flat. "That's everything," Gerald confirmed. My son turned to me. His eyes were red. Whether from guilt or from the simple shock of being caught, I genuinely couldn't tell. I had been trying to read this man's face for 51 years, and I had apparently missed a great deal. "I'm sorry, Dad." I didn't say anything for a moment. There is a kind of silence that isn't cold. It's not warm either. It's the silence of a person deciding something important, weighing what has been broken against what might still be worth keeping. "I know you are," I finally said. "I'm not sure sorry is enough right now, but I'm willing to find out." His wife looked at him, then at me, something shifting in her expression for the first time. Not warmth, exactly. More like the recognition that the ground had moved and the terrain was different now. The meeting ended 90 minutes later. Gerald and I walked out into the afternoon sun, and I stood in the parking lot for a while just breathing the dry Tucson air. "You did well in there," Gerald said. "I don't feel well," I said. "No, you wouldn't." I drove home alone, made coffee, sat on my back porch where I can see the mountains at their best in the late afternoon, the light coming in low and orange across the ridgeline. I had been sitting on this porch for 31 years, and it had never looked the same twice. My phone buzzed. A text from my granddaughter. A photograph of a drawing she had made that day at school. A picture of what appeared to be a house and a yard and 2 stick figures, one tall and one short, labeled in her careful, imperfect printing. "Grandpa and me." I stared at that picture for a long time. The weeks that followed were not easy. My son resigned from operational control as agreed. His wife retained a separate attorney and spent several weeks in tense back-and-forth negotiations over the repayment structure. Gerald handled it. I let him handle it. There were things said in those negotiations, things relayed secondhand that clarified the full shape of what had been planned, and some of those things were harder to sit with than the original discovery. My daughter-in-law had been the architect of the consulting arrangement. That was clear from the documents. My son had known and had permitted it and had participated in the early equity discussions. He was not an innocent who had been led astray. He was a man who had made choices, repeatedly and over time, and who had dressed those choices in the language of concern and love and protection. That's the part that stays with me. Not the money, the language. Sitting across the table from him during what was supposed to be a routine meeting, listening to him tell me the conservatorship was for my own protection, looking into the eyes of a man I had loved and raised and trusted, and not recognizing what was behind them. That's the injury that doesn't show up in any audit. We didn't speak for 2 months after the conference room meeting. Then my granddaughter's birthday came, and he called to ask if I was planning to attend. I told him I was. He said he was glad. We were both careful on the phone, polite and cautious, 2 people who had walked through a fire and weren't sure yet what was still standing. The birthday party was at their house. My granddaughter was turning 10. She had asked for a science kit and a book about astronomy, which tells you something about her. She ran to me when I arrived and wrapped her arms around my waist and told me she had been saving me a seat at the table. My son and I didn't talk about any of it that day. We talked about her, mostly. About school, about the book she was reading, about whether she was old enough for a telescope. We were 2 men building something very carefully out of very fragile materials, and we both understood, without saying it, that we had to build slowly. After the party, after my granddaughter had gone to bed, my son and I sat on his back patio. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a sky thick with stars. We sat without talking for a while. "I told myself it was for your benefit," he finally said. "I want you to know I'm aware of how that sounds now." What would actually have been for my benefit, I said, was a conversation. You could have come to me and said you were worried about my health, that you wanted to talk about succession planning. I would have listened. I know. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because I wasn't sure you'd give me what I wanted. There it was, the honest answer. Finally, without the packaging of concern. You were probably right, I said. I might not have, so I tried to take it. Yes. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager, since the years when he was still figuring out how to hold the weight of his own mistakes. I don't know if you can forgive me for that. I don't know either, I said. But I want to try. Not for you, for her. I nodded toward the window where the light from my granddaughter's room was still on. He nodded slowly. That's fair. It's more than fair, I said. It's everything I've got right now. We sat there until the stars moved and the air got cold, and neither of us said much more. Sometimes, silence between two people is emptiness. And sometimes it's something being rebuilt, plank by plank, in the dark. The agreement was finalized in early summer. The company brought in a professional management team. My board seat was restored with its full voting rights. Dale Pruitt's audit became part of the permanent record. The equity partners, when informed of the full situation, were not pleased with my son's conduct and made that displeasure known through channels I let Gerald handle. I am still in my house on the edge of the mountains, still have my morning coffee on the back porch, still watch the ridgeline at dusk when the light does what light does out here, which is something I have never been able to adequately describe to anyone who hasn't seen it. Some things you have to stand in to understand. My son and I talk on the phone twice a week now. It's not what it was before any of this, but it's honest in a way it might not have been even then. We talk about the business sometimes, about my granddaughter, about small things. We are careful with each other in the way of people who know exactly what they damaged and are not willing to damage it further. My daughter-in-law and I are cordial. I'm not sure what will be beyond that. There are certain betrayals that leave a scar in the geography of a relationship. A changed place you can feel even when you've stopped hurting. We love the same child, which means we will be in each other's lives, and we are both adults who know what that requires. That's where we are. I still see my granddaughter every week. We finished the book about astronomy together, sitting at my kitchen table with her notes in the margins and her questions tumbling over each other. She wants to understand how far away things are. She finds it amazing that when you look at a star, you're seeing light that left it thousands of years ago, that the star itself might not even exist anymore, that distance and time do something strange to what we can actually see. I told her that was one of the most interesting things I had ever heard. She looked pleased. Last week she asked me what was the most important thing I had ever learned. I told her I needed to think about it. I thought about it for 2 days. Then I drove over on Saturday afternoon and told her this. The most important thing I had ever learned is that the people who love you most are not always the people who want the best for you, and that knowing the difference is some of the hardest work a human being can do. And that doing that work, facing it honestly even when it hurts, is what makes it possible to keep going. She wrote it down in her notebook. I watched her pencil move across the page. She asked me if it was okay if she also wrote down that Grandpa had told her. I said it was more than okay. I drove home with the windows down, the evening air moving through the car, the mountains going their slow and reliable purple and gold in the distance. I had lost a year of sleep and $2 million worth of trust and something I'm still finding words for when it comes to my son. And I had kept my house and my mind and my granddaughter's Saturday afternoons and the right to be difficult and independent and exactly who I had always been. If you're watching this and someone you love has tried to use your age against you, I tried to frame care as a reason to take what you've built. I want you to hear something. Being older doesn't make you a target. It makes you someone with enough history to know what to look for, enough patience to wait for the right moment, and enough experience to understand that the truth, documented carefully and presented at exactly the right time, is still the most powerful thing in any room. I'm 63. I built something out of nothing and I'm still here. I watched my son try to take it and I let him think he could right up until the moment he couldn't. I'm still in my house, still on my board, still watching those mountains every morning, and my granddaughter still calls me Grandpa like it's the most natural word in the world. That's not nothing, that's everything. If this story meant something to you, like it and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're going through something like this right now, something that feels like betrayal wearing the face of concern, remember that you are allowed to be both loving and strategic. You are allowed to say, "I see what you're doing," even softly, even without anger, and to make sure that what you built stays in the hands you built it with. I'll see you in the next one.